Strong social pressures and cultural ideologies were implemented to develop strict gender roles in post-war Japanese society. The salaryman and the housewife have been long-standing normative positions within Japanese family life that were rarely contested until a period of economic recession combined with several social, cultural, and evolutionary factors began to break down notions of traditional masculinity. Around the late 1990s, early 2000s, alternative forms of masculinity began to appear. First term femio tokokun in the early 2000s, meaning slim, feminine boys. Akibake, around 2005, meaning Akihabara style. And Soushokuke danshi, from 2010 to the present, meaning herbivore men. These terms denoted young men, generally between the ages of 20 and 34, who are heavily interested in being alone to engage in activities such as playing video games and reading manga, heavy consumerism such as shopping and, as some would term, narcissistic beautification, individualistic lower-paying careers, and are less sexually driven than males expressing traits characteristic of traditional masculinity as accepted in Japanese society. The social and cultural pressures that demand men's strong dedication and devotion to work, as well as women's obligation to marry and have children, have caused many young men in Japan to question the role and expectations they were born into. During most of the 1980s, many large companies were recruiting employees out of high school or universities, making the path to becoming a salaryman quick and easy. But when the economic bubble burst in the early 1990s, this once seamless transition became less realistic. Many young men were forced to work multiple part-time jobs, or jobs that were undesirable to those seeking a high-paying office job. A period of economic recession in Japan made the role of salaryman and breadwinner less available to young men, and with an idealized masculinity possessing such strong ties to high-paid labor and monetary superiority in a relationship, the traditional role masculinity had occupied was now in a precarious state. Young men at this time who could not obtain rigorous, high-paying office jobs with overtime, drinking after work, and virtually no time for personal enjoyment often turned to more individualistic jobs such as hairdressers, waiters, or retail workers to earn a living. This recession period in the late 90s, early 2000s, as well as some cross-cultural influences from Chinese and Korean ideologies historically valuing intellectualism over physical strength, as well as kabuki actors in bishonen or androgyny, and anime and manga blurring gender boundaries, led to the emergence of alternative forms of masculinity, including herbivore men. Maki Fukusawa coined the term soushokuke danshi in order to describe passive heterosexual men who are uninterested or unambitious towards romantic relationships. However, I will note here this may be a ramification of their lower spending power, all too familiar to the West when considering women's mating strategies, or hypergamy. Apparently, the term was intended to express a high amount of spirituality, enlightenment, and was chosen because of the eating practices of Buddhist monks who do not eat meat. A herbivore is typically a plant-eating animal who holds a lower rank in the food chain because it does not hunt prey to eat. The metaphor implies that herbivore men are passive, non-assertive, and have no interest in fleshly desires. This is further bolstered by the results of a survey given by M1F1 Soken in 2009 that obtained results from 1,000 Japanese men between the ages of 20 and 34 in Tokyo. This survey found that 60.5% of the sample considered themselves to be herbivore men, 62.8% considered themselves to not be assertive when it came to relationships, and most interestingly, 46.7% stated that, quote, "It is foolish to spend a lot of money to get close to someone of the opposite sex," end quote. Herbivore men are also typically not as sexually driven as their salaryman counterparts. They are also less career-focused and may share breadwinning responsibilities with their partners in the event they have one. Quite different from the expected notions of masculinity, while some herbivore men do participate in relationships, others simply keep female friends or practice celibacy and resort to alternative means to satiate their desires. Now that a foundation for understanding the herbivore men has been set, an analysis of the famous mouse Utopia experiment will be utilized to draw parallels and further expand on the recent changes in male gender norms within Japanese society. 20th century behavioral researcher John B. Calhoun, in attempts to draw conclusions regarding dense human society, utilized mice in his famous Mouse Utopia experiment. He prefaces the subsequent article titled Death Squared, the explosive growth and demise of a mouse population by stating that, although the focus of the study is mice, his ultimate focus is that of man. In creating a utopia for the mice, Calhoun removes factors, i.e., resource scarcity, inclement weather, disease, and predators found naturally in ecosystems that could potentially result in mortality. Furthermore, the nature of the utopian apparatus, Universe 25, was maintained inside a lab and tall enough that immigration of mice was an impossibility. The experiment was sectioned into 4 phases, indicating the state of population growth. Phase A, titled the striving phase, was just that. The initial period on 9 July 1968, where 4 male and 4 female mice colonized Universe 25. From here, the mice adjusted to their new surroundings, and following this, the first offspring were born on day 104. Phase B, titled the resource exploitation phase, was the time of the most rapid increase in population density. The population doubled following 55-day increments until it reached a total of 620 and began to slow down. At this time, doubling of the population would occur every 145 days. Phase C, titled the stagnation phase, was when things began to get interesting regarding the tendencies of these mice, and ostensibly, that of man. This phase began on day 315 and puts into perspective what can happen when there aren't enough spaces in the social dominance hierarchy. As this was a utopia, production of offspring was very successful and had a very low rate of mortality. Due to this, and coupled with an inability to immigrate, all male mice competed for a position within the social dominance hierarchy. However, due to natural limitations, some could not obtain a position, and this group proceeded to relegate themselves to the center of Universe 25, forming a mass of mice. These mice would attack each other, scar tissue on the body as well as mangled tails being a common signifier. By dint of the ever-growing population density, males that were successful in the hierarchy constantly had to protect females from competing males seeking reproductive opportunities. This pressure became too great, and eventually apathy ensued on the part of the reproductively successful males, an adaptive ramification being females displaying aggressive behaviors characteristic of territorial males. These behaviors by females eventually were extrapolated to their offspring, resulting in acts such as miscarriages, offspring mortality, and early expulsion of offspring, leaving them without adequate maternal bonding and social skills. Inadequate maternal bonding paired with a dense environment further hindering bonding processes paved the way for societal collapse. Females born during the last 50 days of Phase C were titled non-producers, given that, when viewing a sample of 148 female mice, the 3 that did get pregnant only produced 1 offspring. This is quite staggering given that previous females would have multiple litters within the same time span. Comparatively, males of the same cohort, titled the beautiful ones, never fought, sexually engaged females, and committed only to sleeping, eating, drinking, and grooming. Given the inadequacy of the maternal practices faced by offspring, non-producing females and the beautiful ones continued to proliferate and constituted the majority in Phase D, titled the death phase. This was from day 560 and, like the phase title, was the end of society. From this, I believe it could be argued that parallels between contemporary Japanese society in relation to the emergence of herbivore men and the Mouse Utopia experiment do exist. Charlie Boys, in proposing why herbivore masculinity has proliferated in contemporary Japanese society, states that a dearth of permanent employment positions may have caused males to prioritize alternative forms of masculinity outside of the standard salaryman model. By dint of this, practices such as, quote, narcissistic body management, a primacy of consumption, and the formation of intimate opposite-sex friendships, end quote, are emphasized. Wiles, in explaining the beautiful ones phenomenon, states that they, quote, never sought sex and never fought, they just ate, slept, and groomed, wrapped in narcissistic introspection, end quote. This quote-unquote narcissistic nature, as stated in both models, along with not prioritizing reproduction, serves as our first parallel. Population density came second as the term herbivore masculinity became mainstream in 2009, directly before population rates proceeded to fall and have been predicted to continue through the year 2050, a trend projected to result in a population of 40% being of retirement age by the same year. This is a trend all too familiar when considering the proliferation of the non-producing females and the rise of the beautiful ones towards the end of Phase C, ostensibly serving as a direct warning for the forthcoming death phase. As a potential final parallel, the inadequacy of social bonding faced by mice may be explained from a psychoanalytic perspective. Object relations theory posits that we are molded by and reflect images of significant childhood figures such as parents, and that these images serve as later relationship guides. In accordance with this theory, if the outcome of childhood maltreatment in mice by the mother resulted in not prioritizing sexual relationships, potentially as an adaptation practice, something akin to this may be extrapolated to contemporary Japanese society. To conclude, whether discussing MGTOW or herbivore men in contemporary society, ultimately, and invariably, they will be looked down upon. There are a multitude of reasons for this, such as not prioritizing reproduction, and although herbivore men do engage in consumerism, their deviation from traditional salaryman masculinity to prioritize more individualistic career paths facilitating more balance and personal time is not sacrificial, nor conducive to satiating female hypergamy, reproducing, or financing the pension system, which is already unstable in Japan. As stated, by 2050, 40% of the Japanese population is projected to be of retirement age, and if herbivore men, a demographic potentially constituting 60% of the population, are not reproducing, nor financing the pension system at an adequate rate, we could truly be looking at what John B. Calhoun termed the death phase. If you got something out of this content, please like, share, comment, subscribe, consider donating or becoming a patron, and as always, here's to the research, and take care.